Well, quarantine won't be so bad. At least I got plenty of beer down here. Hello and welcome to the bunker. I hope you're staying safe, staying healthy, and if you're in the same position as me, you're staying home. Now, that just means we're going to be confined in our homes until about, well, I don't know when. If you're watching this in the future, please let me know. I'd like to hopefully know when I can get back to life as normal. But while you're confined at home, it's a great time to take up a new hobby. And homebrewing is definitely a great one. Not only is it rewarding and a fun way to sort of pass the time, but you'll supply your fallout shelter with a bunch of homemade hooch. And I mean, what's wrong with that? I got started brewing seriously about a year ago, and it was with the goal of making a nice dry cider. A lot of the ciders that I've tried here in the States are super sweet. And that's not such a bad thing if you're really into that, but a dry cider really lets you have a nice blank canvas, so to speak. You can hop it later, you can add different flavors to it, you can back sweeten it a little bit with unique things and really make it interesting. And that's what got me started. This year of January 2020, I made it my New Year's resolution to up my brewing game and start a new brew each month and also sort of buy new equipment for my setup down here, which we'll see in a bit. It was a good way to sort of try new experimental things, but the problem is that you know how New Year's resolutions go. It took a global pandemic for me to actually sit down and work on this. Yeah. Well, regardless, if you're following along here with me, feel free to use these videos as sort of a tutorial. I'll post the recipes as I make them for each brew that I start each month. But if you really want pointers, there's really tons of good resources out there to look forward to. And me being mostly an amateur, I'm more than happy to field any questions that I think I can handle or direct you in a way that you need to go. If you're starting out for the first time, a lot of these supplies can be ordered online, or better yet, you can look for your local homebrew shop and support them. A lot of them will be doing orders, I'm sure, or you can still go there and they'll bring out the supplies that you need, as long as you know what you need when you arrive there. It's different from state to state, but where I'm at here, the local homebrew shop is basically doing takeout only. You tell them what you want and they bring it to you. Definitely a good time to support these businesses here. Let's jump into the planning phase of this first one. I want to stick with something that I know, and that's going to be another cider. The reason why I have a whiteboard down here is that it really helps me visualize what I set out to do, and having a goal is super important in this process. So let's just jump into the planning phase right now. Well, first things first, we're gonna need a blank canvas to work with here. Let's get rid of that. I got the idea for this first cider by talking to one of my friends who's over in California, and he's been in quarantine for a while. He told me that he absolutely loves Mosaic hops. So we're definitely going to use Mosaic hops, probably in our secondary. I won't be getting to that section until next month after we're done with our primary. Starting off in primary, I've got my 6-gallon fermenter. And we're going to start with basically what I did as my very first test run, which was just a mix of apple cider and apple juice. Going into primary. Having apple cider and apple juice in here not only gives us a good bite from the cider, but that juice, especially even if it's from concentrate, you can even use those frozen concentrate cans, is going to give us a nice amount of sugar for the yeast to feed on. And I think, again, just keeping things simple, we'll use a regular cider yeast for this. Straightforward primary fermentation. Once we get to secondary, which will be next month, because this will take at least a month to ferment, we'll use my wide mouth. Generally, when you're putting your must, that's your combination of your juices, into your primary, you want to leave plenty of headroom on the top. I've got a 6-gallon fermenter for primary, but I only have a 5-gallon for secondary. Usually when you're straining off or siphoning things off into this secondary one, you're gonna lose some of that liquid, and I think this gets by just fine. Normally it takes the liquid pretty close to the top for secondary, but that gives me an opportunity to dry hop the thing in secondary. Dry hop's a little bit of a misnomer. The hops obviously get wet. It just means that you're adding them in later on. Typically what you do is you put these into a hop bag, or you can let them free float if you really want to. One of the reasons why I love brewing is there's no right or wrong way to do a lot of this stuff. Obviously there's rules that you have to follow, but it really is more of an art than a science. Still, I'm gonna write everything down as I go along, quantities, and keep track of it. That way if I get something I like, I can reproduce it later. I don't think I want to fill this all the way up since I'll be making these as I go along. I'll find exact measurements or whatever I can get at the store to sort of fill my primary up. The other thing that I'd really like to do is add a nice shot of blueberry into this. When I think about mosaic hops, they're really, kind of fruity, tart. We want something that's really going to complement that. And adding blueberries into our secondary, also in a bag, potentially. I think that might add a nice little flavor to this. Since he's quarantined over in California, I think we're gonna call this one, let's grab this. We'll call it Blue, I can't spell. Blue Morrow. It's a bit of a pun based on where he's living, and we like puns when we're naming our ciders. What we're gonna do is we're gonna assemble everything in primary first, and I'll be going along step by step, and hopefully by the time we get to secondary, we'll have a nice blueberry cider as we're done. I might also add a little bit of blueberry juice into the must. We'll see. If you're just starting out and you want something really basic, there's no need to do the rest of this. There's no need to do the secondary. Start out with just the apple cider and the apple juice and the cider yeast. Let it go for a month and have a taste. It'll be pretty dry and it'll be pretty, I'm not really sure what the regular word is, but I try to use the term blank canvas. It's a straightforward cider and you really can't go wrong. The longer you let it sit too, the more it will mellow out. But I think this is a good place to start. And I think we're just gonna go ahead and get it assembled right now. Well, I've got everything I need here to get started. Before I put everything on the table, I made sure to wipe it down with sanitizer. What you wanna do is get something like Star San and mix it up with about 5 gallons of tap water. I have an old brewer's bucket with a spigot on the bottom that I use because you can actually keep this stuff for quite some time before you need to throw it out and get rid of it. Having the spigot on the bottom makes it easier to fill my carboys, and then with the opening on the top, I can immerse things and just let them air dry. There's no need to rinse this stuff off. You just want to let everything sit for a while until it's nice and dry, and then you're good to go. I wasn't able to get quite as much juice as I wanted, but that's okay. We're doing some experimental stuff. I always start out with this Musselman's, which is just a real, straightforward cider, gets the job done. If you can get fresh pressed stuff from an orchard, even better, but depending upon when you're doing this, it might not be in season. Couple quick things to note about our juice here. This stuff is pasteurized. If you get fresh juice that hasn't been pasteurized, you need something called Camden tablets. That will sit in your cider. You basically put it in and don't stopper it right away. Just put like a cloth over the top, or like a hop bag works really well. And what that does is kills any wild yeast strains that are in the unpasteurized. Since this is pasteurized, go for it. You can dump it in and you can use it right away. That's why I always try to snag that. So we're gonna start by adding in 2 gallons of this. It was all I was able to find. That's okay. Now Musselman's has a little bit of sediment in it, like most ciders do. And one of the things that you need, I guess I'll wait till I'm done with this. We'll speed it up in post. Since there's sediment in a lot of ciders, one of the things that you need in order to break down the sediment is something called pectic enzyme. This is stuff that you can get from local brewer shops. You have to add in a teaspoon of it per every gallon of your must. So here's our second gallon. All right. So Muselmann's works fine, but it gets expensive pretty quick. And I like to fill up the rest of the carboy with just regular apple juice. Now, when you're buying this, you have to make sure that it doesn't have potassium sorbate in it or sodium benzoate. Those will kill fermentation. Ascorbic acid is fine. If your juice is just regular juice from concentrate that has ascorbic acid, it's fine. It might discolor things a little bit through the fermentation process, but it's perfectly safe for your yeast. So I'm gonna add in 2 gallons of this. I don't know why, but I always like watching liquids run through a funnel. It always has that sort of spin effect. Very soothing, like a lava lamp almost. All right, now we're up to about 4 gallons in our must. If you want a basic dry cider and you're only gonna do a single step fermentation, you can skip adding in what I want to do with this sort of experimental one, and that is adding in blueberry juice. Now this is just a quart, so the total sum of our must is going to be 4 1/4 gallons. Look at that. Going in like sludge. That is just a really, really cool effect. I was talking about lava lamps earlier, but that is really cool. Just watching that sort of bleed through down. Another quick tip that I always try to incorporate as I'm going through is I like to hang on to these just so I have a nice gallon measure. The Muselmann containers are really handy just because they have that handle. So if you're doing a lot of pouring, which you will for home brewing, always good to have something like this on hand to quickly measure a gallon. All right. Now before we add anything else to this, I'm just gonna give that a little shake to sort of mix the must. It's heavy. There we go. It's still a little bit funky there down on the bottom, but that's all right. So I mentioned earlier, in order to get rid of some of the debris that comes with your unfiltered ciders, you need pectic enzyme. And for this, we need to add about 1/2 teaspoon per gallon of must. Since we're sitting at 4 1/4 and the vast majority of the sediment was just from the cider, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna add in a little bit here. Not too much. Oh, I was hoping my 1/2 teaspoon would fit in this container, but it's not. This is gonna break down any sediment you have, and when you're done with your final product, you'll have a nice clear cider. Just another teaspoon. Oop. Perfect. Fantastic. Again, pectic enzyme you can find at your local brew shop here. Just, comes in these little containers. Just ask for it, they'll know what you need. The other thing that I always like to do is add in yeast nutrient. That's gonna keep the yeast alive and working hard through the fermentation process. This is 1 teaspoon per gallon of must. And since we've got 4 1/4, whoa. This stuff has a tendency to clump up just a little bit. So, get as close to that as possible. Excellent. 1 teaspoon. Oh, I need 1 more for about 4 1/4. Very good. That's going to keep our yeast alive, happy, and healthy, as you should be during this time. All right. Now, I'm going to just give that another little shake there. It should be just fine. I just realized I forgot my yeast. I'll be right back. And now the final thing that we need to do is pitch our yeast. Since I'm working with less than 6 gallons here, I don't need to use the whole packet. This is just Cider House Select. I believe this actually has a yeast nutrient in already, but you know, never hurts to have a little bit of extra nutrient for the yeast in there. Well, it might, I don't know. It's just never produced bad results when I've added extra. So 4/6, I'm going to use about 2/3 of the packet, not quite the whole thing. It's always nice to sort of let the liquid sort of spin around. That's why I try to give things a little bit of that spin, and by the time it slows down a bit, your yeast will sort of move in this sort of roundabout fashion when you're pitching it, and you get a little bit more surface coverage that way. We want that to rest happily on the top. A little more, and I've got about 1/3 of the packet left. Now, I'll generally save this for small batches. I have a smaller demijohn if I want to do something really wild. I'll save the rest of the yeast and just pitch it in that. That thing's only about 1.5 gallons, so about 1/3 of a packet works just fine. Keep this in the fridge. I always put it in a sealed container because obviously it's going to fly out of the packet, and it'll keep for a while as long as you've got it at a nice comfy temperature. The last step is to go ahead and put our stopper on. And in order to monitor the fermentation, what we do is we add this airlock. And the airlock needs to be filled up. There's a small, that's why I have the secondary camera, small line here that we need to fill it up to. I just fill it up with water. I've heard some people say that you can use sanitizer in this. I guess that would be fine. I can't see any reason why it wouldn't be a problem, but I always add in nice, just clear water. Add that in. And basically, after a day, you'll start to see this inner piece come up from the air escaping from the fermentation process. It moves this center piece up, and you'll hear a boop sound, and it'll settle back down. That's that air escaping from the fermentation. That's really all there is to it. I'm hoping that next month, when I move this into secondary, it'll be really, really tasty. We're gonna let this sit for an entire month, and we'll go from there. If you wanted to scale this up a bit and bring it all the way up to that 5 or 6 gallon mark, totally fine. I like doing smaller batches because I can only drink so much. That's not true. But hopefully this will get you started. As I keep rolling with these videos, I want to try to experiment a little bit more, doing a little bit more interesting things, and try to go through the process a little bit quicker, so that way I can get a little more excited about my ingredients and what I'm doing. Hopefully this first one was at least a decent tutorial for those of you getting started. Let me know if you have any questions, and hopefully you can get to homebrewing during this whole pandemic thing. Stay safe out there.